How are we doing, Miami Dolphins fans? It is Ben Morgan of the Fins Up Network, and one of my favorite times of the year, Draft Junkie. NFL Scouting Combine Week has officially arrived, which means today's video, we are diving into 5 targets of the Miami Dolphins. Now, these guys that I'm going to single out today aren't necessarily your day one targets. We are going to have plenty of time. We are going to talk plenty about the day one targets of the Miami Dolphins as the offseason goes on. But these are the guys that I'm going to talk a little bit about today, a little bit more under the radar, guys that I want to see how, in fact, they stack up compared to some of those guys that are day one targets, that are those earlier round targets. So before I jump into anything today, as always, got to hear from you. First and foremost, if you haven't gotten subscribed yet, please do so. Thank you to everyone that already is subscribed. If you haven't done so, would definitely appreciate that. Second, who do you have your eye on in this year's NFL Scouting Combine? Drop your prospects in the comments. Curious to see who you will be watching. I'm also happy to give my thoughts on those prospects as well if you would like my opinion. So just let me know. Let's jump in with a wide receiver right away. That's Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. So yeah, another small school. We're not talking about one of the top tier prospects here, like I said, going into this. But if you haven't watched Corley play yet, think of a faster former number 14. That number 14 being Jarvis Landry. Yeah, now that is a pretty aggressive comparison, but quite honestly, that's a guy you get the ball to, you give him space, you let him create. Now, not only does he have the good speed and quickness, but man, he is so hard to bring down on that first contact. And that's kind of where that Jarvis Landry comp comes from. Then he's also got those good moves to tag along with that once he's in the open field. There are times when you're watching this guy's tape where you kind of just assume that the play is over. Somehow he escapes the broken tackles. He gets those extra yards. In certain situations, he's taking it to the house after you already think that a play is over. Now, if you think about what we need to possibly add to the Dolphins wide receiver room, outside of the obvious Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, it's that physical wide receiver that can create and take advantage of the space that's provided by those speedsters that I just mentioned there. So if the Dolphins were to draft him, I would envision Corley kind of being that wide receiver that can work those crossing routes, create once the ball's in his hands, because on those crossing routes, if he's running that with a Waddle or a Tyreek, majority of the defender's attention is going to go to either Hill or Waddle on those routes, leaving Corley potentially wide open or at least in single coverage. As you can see on the scroll there, he is currently ranked wide receiver 14. So obviously, like I said, he's not in the neighborhood of your Malik Neighbors, your Marvin Harrison Jr.'s, those kind of guys. But he is a guy that has been rising up those rankings. And I'm curious to see, like, really how he performs alongside those top tier guys at the combine. Let's go to a tight end here with the next one. That's Dalton Hulker, tight end out of Colorado State. Actually spent his first few years at BYU at the college ranks. Let's start with the question mark that surrounds Hulker, because it's the one that draws the most immediate red flags for Dolphins fans whenever we talk about tight ends. And that's how he projects as that inline blocking tight end. Now, some analysts are going to say, you know what, he's functional as a blocker. He's the high effort, the fundamental type of blocker, which is fine and all when it works. But there's definitely a crowd of draft analysts as well that believe he's going to need to add strength, potentially significant amount of strength, in order to compete as a blocker at the next level. Now, with that said, put this guy's tape on. His hands are sticky. Think about Little Giants when he gets them stuck to himself and he can't get them off. There's an old reference for you if you haven't seen Little Giants before. Dude's hands are sticky. He does not drop many passes. The tape I watched of him as well, numerous impressive catches outside of that typical catch radius. One-handed catches in bad weather. The dude's hands, like I said, are sticky. Some also are going to question the speed, agility at the next level. So I am kind of curious to see how he does at those type of drills in the combine in comparison to some of these other tight ends in this year's class. It's an interesting class when you're thinking about the tight ends. It's Brock Bowers, and it's kind of like everyone else. There is a tier of some other guys. You got the guy out of Texas. You got a couple other guys, but there is quite a drop off after that. But Hulker, intriguing prospect at the next level. He is turning 24 soon, so he's a little bit older coming into the league. But despite some of those question marks. He's definitely a guy that I'm at least excited to watch, especially in some of those strength drills that we see at the combine, see how he stacks up. Let's talk about a guy that's turning into a draft man crush of mine. That's Christian Haynes, offensive lineman out of UConn, listed as a guard in a lot of most places that you're going to see. However, I've been told that the Dolphins see him with potentially being a guard or a center. But what most NFL draft analysts are considering his strengths are exactly what we look for, the Miami Dolphins look for in an offensive lineman. He's athletic. He projects well as that zone blocking running scheme, and he anchors very well against the interior defensive lineman pass rush. I am curious to see how he measures at the combine, because you're going to also run into some analysts that think his size is a little bit of concern, but most will say that what he lacks kind of in that size, that length, not necessarily red flags, but at least question marks around him, he makes up for with just being super athletic. But he's a guy where if the Dolphins, let's say they don't go offensive line in the first round, or maybe they make some trades, they acquire some additional draft capital, he could be in that next tier of offensive line that maybe we prioritize simply due to how he projects in that zone blocking scheme and then at pass protection at the next level. Let's stay in the trenches, go on to the defensive side of the ball. Dwayne Carter out of Duke. A couple things to point out right away about Carter. Known for his ability more so to defend the run versus rushing the passer. He only had 1 sack in 2023. He's a super high effort motor type of player, but he does have an issue with some missed tackles. So those first couple of things that I said out there sounds a little bit like what we were getting with Christian Wilkins when he came into the league. As you can see from the scroll where he's projected to go right there, you can see it. We're not talking about an early round prospect. We're not talking about a first round prospect like Wilkins, just simply making the comparison to the better against the run than the pass, being a super high motor type of guy. He's a mid-round prospect for a reason. He's not the quickest off the ball. We talked about the missed tackles in the run game, not super polished as a pass rusher from the interior, but it's hard to not be at least a little bit intrigued by that high motor and that ability to clog up lanes in the rushing game. And quite honestly, in this year's draft, there are some pretty quality interior defensive linemen in this draft that we're going to see at the combine. So I'm curious to see, how does Carter look in comparison to some of those options that if we were to go interior defensive line in the first or the second round, what you got, your jer'zahn Newtons, you got your Tavondre Sweats, you got your Chris Jenkins of the world. I want to see, what does that drop off look like? If we don't take one of those guys early, if we wait till maybe one of those 5th round picks, or if we trade back, what are our options look like? That's what I want to see this week out of Carter and others as well. Let's wrap things up with a linebacker, Jalen Ford out of Texas. Now, if you're watching Ford he's a downhill linebacker that just diagnoses plays well, which you can see on the scroll right there. That leads to a lot of tackles at and behind the line of scrimmage. The dude is awesome at that. He's not too bad in coverage, but he's also shown more production, we should say, in zone coverage versus man coverage. And I think a big part of that is just kind of due to his overall athleticism. He doesn't necessarily pop off the screen as being a top tier athlete. He's not super fast when you're watching him in his film. So I am kind of curious to see how he times in some of those drills. But at the same token, you don't have pads on. There's no other athletes on the field with you. We know that game speed and just natural speed when you're by yourself are completely different things. So I don't want to get too hung up on that, but I do have my eye on that. But like I said, if you're looking for a downhill linebacker that can attack running backs, especially when they're inside of the box, Ford is your guy. If you're looking for a more sideline to sideline type of linebacker that can also hang in man coverage as well, make tackles outside of the box, you're likely going to have to draft a linebacker earlier than where Ford is projected to go. But like I said, I wanted to quickly hit on 5 guys that are kind of flying a little bit under the radar. So that is what I have today. But like I said earlier in the video, drop the prospects that you're going to be watching, you'll have your eye on in the combine. Drop them in the comments, and yeah, we'll be seeing how everything plays over the next few days. I will be back with some combine recap videos as well. So like I said, if you haven't gotten subscribed yet, make sure you are doing so. Stay in the know with everything Miami Dolphins related. But that is what I've got for today, Dolphins fans. Until next time, Fins